Hallo liebe Zuschauer. Today I wanted to focus on the GCSE German paper 4, so the writing paper, and in particular I wanted to focus on the translation into German section, which is a pretty tough section of the exam. Let's get into it. So, what skills are important for translation? So the purpose of this part of the exam is it really tests your knowledge of grammar and structures, and of course vocabulary as well. First things first, read the whole text, understand the context of the text, and that's going to make your life a lot easier when it comes to trying to work out what you need to say in German. You really need to try and think like a German. How would a German phrase the sentences that you're being asked to translate? Sometimes that will be similar to how somebody writing in English would phrase it, but not always. So tying in with that is just to avoid literal translation. Focus on the meaning and making it sound good in German. If you translate word for word, that's when you're likely to make mistakes. Attention to detail is really important for this one as well, and we're going to focus on various things that various details that you need to pay attention to when you're translating, and a bit later on in the video. And then finally, proofread it. Check that it all makes sense. Check that it's accurate as far as you're able. Let's start by having a look at the mark scheme. So the translation to German might be something that's a little bit neglected when it comes to the writing paper, where people tend to focus maybe on the 90 word and the 150 word tasks being quite bulky tasks, if we can put it that way. But it's out of 12, which works out as a fifth of the total mark for so it works out as a, yeah, I'm not a maths teacher, but yeah, it's quite a significant chunk of the test, and often find that students who are able to pick up quite a few marks in this section, that can often make the difference between getting an 8 and a 9 at the end. So they've done really well on the 90 words, really well on the 150 words, and maybe just dropped a few marks because of their accuracy or not conveying meaning. So it can be a really important part and just helping you get over the line, and sort of getting a higher grade. And in this video, we're going to look at different things that will make a big difference to you in terms of picking up as many marks as you can as possible. So there's two different aspects to the mark scheme. Firstly, conveying key messages. So that's nothing to do with your, well, it's not really that much to do with your grammar. That's just focusing on, are you conveying the key messages? So that you might make some spelling mistakes, you might get your articles like your der, die, das confused. But if a German person is reading it, can they still understand it? And that's what's important in terms of whether you get a 6 out of 6 for your response. And then the translation is divided into 13 key messages. You get a tick if you've accurately translated that message. Your ticks are added up and then converted into a mark out of 6. So putting those 2 marks out of 6 together gives you a mark out of 12, and that's how it's marked. So even if you're not 100% sure about different bits of grammar, still try and answer as much as you can, because you will get marks for conveying messages independent of your grammatical accuracy. So looking particularly at your excellent knowledge of vocab and structures, so even for 6 out of 6, virtually flawless. So first thing is just try not to leave any gaps. if you're really not sure what to say, just put something in there, because if you leave a gap, the examiner assumes the worst. So they assume it would have been highly inaccurate, which is a 1 out of 6. So obviously that's not for the whole text, but it's just going to form part of the impression that the examiner has of you. So gaps are really the worst thing you can do in this. Just try and make an educated guess if you're really not sure. Doesn't have to be perfect, so you can still get full marks for if you miss some accents. That's accents if it doesn't impact on the meaning of a word. We'll look at what those might be a bit later on. And minor spellings wouldn't stop you from getting the top mark. So, attention to detail. What things do we really need to pay attention to? Well, things like qualifiers, sehr for very, ziemlich, quite, zu, to, as in T-O-O, ein bisschen, a bit or a little. Just missing one of those out can make the difference between getting a tick or not getting a tick. And it's easy when you're worrying about maybe the bigger picture tenses and stuff that you forget to translate one of these words, but makes a big difference. Time phrases, manchmal, sometimes, fast nie, almost never. Again, missing them out makes a big difference. Articles, again, as part of your knowledge of grammar, whether you need to say a or the, might seem like a small thing, but these little things all add up. Tenses, if it's asked you for the past tense and you've translated it into the present tense, you're not going to get the mark. Subject verb, something people mistranslate. Maybe they put the incorrect ending on the verb, or they get the z mixed up, because z can mean she and z can also mean they. So might seem like a simple thing, but people make mistakes with that and it will stop you getting marks. Accents, sometimes it's just a minor thing, but we're going to look at a few examples where the accents, the umlaut is the only accent that we've got in German, that's the double dot. Sometimes that can make a really big difference for meaning, which we'll look at later on. And nouns, making sure you've used the singular and the plural correctly, because that will change the meaning if you don't. Genders, cases, and we'll look at that a bit later on. But these are all things that we need to really focus on if we're aiming for the top mark. Prepositions. So when we were talking at the start about thinking like a German, this is one of the main things. German and English often use different prepositions. So if you're translating literally, then you're going to get marked down. For example, a German would say, Ich bin gut in Mathe. I'm good in maths, not I'm good at maths. Different preposition. Or ich interessiere mich für Geschichte. I'm interested for history, not interested in history. Ich fahre mit dem Zug. I travel with the train, not I travel by train. Ich gehe auf eine neue Schule. I go on a new school rather than I go to a new school. Ich studiere an der Uni. In der Pause. In the break rather than at break. Ich warte auf. I wait on, not I wait for. So these are a few of the key prepositions which are different in German to English, and will just make your translation look a lot more natural if you can use the correct German preposition. Cases is another area which is really tricky to master, but will also impact accuracy. So the article and the adjective ending will change based on the case, and I do have another video which explains this in more detail, so you can click the link at the top of the screen. So basically, if a noun is in the nominative case, so if it's the subject, like the boy is tall, the girl is clever, the child is sweet, then you're going to use the nominative. If it's the direct object, so I have a brother, I have a sister, I have a child, then you're going to need the accusative case. Dative case could be the indirect object, or is often in translation you're going to see it after a preposition like mit, and then the ending is going to change like that. And all the adjective endings for dative, helpfully, end in en. So articles change depending on the case. Really common things to look out for in the translation is with the dative, because there's often a with someone in there. So ich gehe mit meinem Bruder. So any masculine person, mit meinem. A feminine person, mit meiner Schwester, for example. Or if it's plural, then everything is going to end in en. So mit meinen Freunden. So the noun is also going to end in en as well as the adjective. So those are a couple of key ones to that you can kind of learn off by heart for the translation, without getting too bogged down in the rest of the articles and adjective endings. Verb forms. So separable verbs, for example, Fernsehen, to watch TV. So they're separable. Again, click on the video to look at how separable verbs work in more detail. But basically, they're separable because they separate. So ich sehe, so the verb part of it goes second, and then the preposition part goes to the end in the present tense. When it's in the past, it separates just enough just to let the g, to show that it's past tense, go in between the verb part and the preposition part. And then in the future, this is the most straightforward bit, Fernsehen is the infinitive, and we just need the infinitive at the end, so you don't need to change the separable part when it's in the future tense. Or if you're using a modal verb, ich möchte Fernsehen or ich muss Fernsehen, then it's just the infinitive form and it's at the end. Other verb forms, reflexive verbs. We do have reflexive verbs in English, but we don't always use them with the same verbs that we do in German. Make sure you conjugate them correctly as well. It's kind of like I help myself, you help yourself. Ich entspanne mich. So literally, I relax myself. Or ich langweile mich. So I get bored. Literally translates to I bore myself. Or ich entscheide mich. I decide. So we don't use myself in the English form, but we do in the German. And conjugating it correctly, wir verstehen uns gut. We get on well. Literally, we understand ourselves well. Sie lassen sich scheiden. So the sich form is for er, for sie, and also for they. Es gehört mir. So it belongs to me. Ich putze mir. So sometimes it's mich, sometimes for certain verbs it could be mir. Idioms or idiomatic phrases, another key one where you're thinking like a German. Ich hab die Nase voll, I've had enough. Es geht mir auf die Nerven, or in the past, es ist mir auf die Nerven gegangen. Das ist mir egal, I don't mind. So these are all kind of idiomatic expressions that we use in German. Verb collocations. So es macht Spaß. German literally says it makes fun, rather than it is fun. Or wir machen Fotos. We take photos, but Germans again use the verb make. Sie macht eine Party. So like she has a party, but she makes a party. Eine Prüfung bestehen, to pass an exam. Ins Kino gehen. So both gehen and fahren mean to go, but gehen means you're going on foot. Fahren would imply that you're driving into the cinema. Common mistakes then. So common mistakes with verbs. Ich möchte Arzt sein. I would like to be a doctor. Or ich möchte Arzt werden. I would like to become a doctor, not bekommen. So sein, to be. Sometimes people, when they mean sein, they use sind, but sind means are. For example, wir sind. Bekommen we would use as like to receive. Ich bekomme gute Noten. I get good grades or I receive good grades. Ich will, a false friend, means I want to, whereas ich werde means I will. Ich mag, so I like, and mag, so the I form and the he, she form are actually the same. And for some reason in school we're always talking about I or he or she really, and we don't very often see the we form of like, but it's mögen. And if that comes up, that's a really tricky one, which I reckon most people are not going to remember, so make sure you remember. Ich mochte, here's where leaving out the umlaut can make a big difference. Ich mochte, I liked. Ich möchte, I would like. So if you forget the accent here, that's a major error and will cost you marks. Common mistakes with literal translations, particularly with comparatives. Besser als, a lot of people translate than as done, but when we're using comparatives in German, it's always with als. And in English, we'd say more, if it's an adjective with two syllables or more, we'd say more interesting than, but Germans wouldn't say mehr interessant. For every single adjective, you're just going to add er to the adjective to make it a comparative. Interessanter als. And I'm addicted to computers. I'm computer addicted. Ich bin computersüchtig. Singular and plural, another common area for mistakes. Mein Bruder, but meine Brüder. So meine is only going to be for feminine or for plural. So just this is where attention to detail makes a big difference. Der Computer, singular, but die Computer, so the plural form is exactly the same as the singular form, but it's just the der changes to die. So what else have we got? Der Lehrer, the teacher, male. Die Lehrerin, the teacher, female. So sometimes it won't make a difference which one you use, as long as you don't just mix the two together. But then die Lehrer is plural, so you have to be careful because just a slight little mistake can really change the meaning. Whereas die Lehrerinnen is female plural and die Lehrer would be mixed or male plural. This one is a really big one. People get this confused all the time with the variations of friend. Der Freund, friend who is male or a boyfriend. Die Freundin, a female friend or a girlfriend. Die Freunde is plural friends, but then when it's in the dative case, mit den Freunden, that would be plural, but it's only going to end in en if you've got mit or another preposition in front of it. Articles. This one, die See, the sea, but der See, the lake. And if you want to say something like I swim in the sea, then in der See, or in the lake, in dem See. So that's probably the standout one in terms of where you can change the article and it completely changes the meaning. So definite articles, die, der, das, but indefinite articles, eine, einen, ein, among others, but just making sure you get the correct one if the text is asking you to translate a or the. Also talking about time phrases, so letzten Sommer, last summer. If it's a season, a month, a day of the week, it's always going to be letzten or nächsten for next. Letzte Woche or nächste Woche, Woche ending in E, so that means letzte and nächste should also end in an E. But be careful, Wochenende, anything ending in ende is neuter. So letztes Wochenende or nächstes Wochenende. Same letztes Jahr, nächstes Jahr, but not Jahre. Adding an E is going to make that plural. With plurals, people sometimes get that confused as well. When they mean one film, Film, same thing in German, but Filme, adding an E is going to make something plural. And in the holiday, so Ferien is actually plural, so in den letzten Ferien or in den nächsten Ferien. If you're talking about jobs or instruments, then Germans wouldn't use an article beforehand. Like in English, we say I am a teacher or I play the piano. But in German, ich spiele Klavier, no article. Ich arbeite als Lehrer, no article. Spelling, I-N-E, Lieder, songs, but leider, unfortunately, that can make a big difference. Umlauts or accents, sometimes not going to have much of an impact if you forget it, but sometimes schon, already, schön, nice or beautiful, big difference. Wurde, was, when you're using the passive. Würde, would, big difference. Konnten, could, in the past. Könnten, could, for a suggestion, present or future, like wir könnten Fußball spielen. Oh, we could play football. You're making a suggestion. But ich konnte Klavier spielen. Like when I was younger, I could play the piano, but now I can't. So difference in tense. Using the word when. 3 different words for when in German. Wann for questions. Wann hast du Geburtstag? Wenn is in the present tense or in a conditional sense. Wenn es regnet, spiele ich am Computer. When you're talking about the past, then we need als. Als ich junger war, hatte ich lange Haare, for example. I had long hair. True story. Tenses and conjugations, and this would be something that can make your translation a major error if you get the wrong one. Ich habe, ich bin, in the present. Hat, ist, in the present. Ich hatte, I had, or ich war, I was. And this is where sometimes the hatte and the hat get confused. And in the past, hatte, or sie hatte, or war, or sie war. That's the same. So I had for, and he had, she had, is the same form in German for I and he and she. Ich hatte, ich war, war. Mag and gern, another classic. They both mean like, but they're slightly different words. Mag is actually a verb, whereas gern is an adverb. So how you use them in a sentence is different. So mag with nouns, like ich mag Tennis, or ich mag Schokolade, or ich mag Mathe. Whereas gern, we have to use it after a verb. So ich spiele gern Tennis. So gern it's an adverb because it's connecting, it's giving us more information about the verb spiele. Ich esse gern Bratwurst, or ich wohne gern in Berlin. So gern with a verb. It's just going to affect your grammatical accuracy if you use the wrong one, even though people might still be able to understand what you're saying. Modal verbs. So present and the past. We know that with German verbs in the present, with the I form, like ich wohne, ich esse, ich spiele, that the I form adds an E, but modal verbs are irregular, so ich muss, not adding an E in the I form, and the he, she form is the same as the I form. If you want to make that past, then we need to add TE. So ich musste is past, musste. And müssen, so in the present it has an umlaut, but in the past there is no umlaut and we're adding a T. So you can see with these modal verbs, the I and the he, she form are always the same, present and past. Ich kann, ich konnte. Kann, konnte. Wir können. So again, modal verbs, they have an umlaut in the plural in the present, but that's all. And allowed to, ich darf. This one is the most irregular one. Ich durfte. Darf, durfte. Again, knocking off the umlaut for the plurals for we and they. Word order. Again, thinking like a German. Ich spiele am Wochenende Tennis, and you can be a bit flexible with the other elements, but the verb must be the second idea. And we say second idea because the first idea is sometimes just one word, like ich, but it could be am Wochenende, or in meiner Freizeit, in my free time, or mit meiner Familie. The first idea could be a 2 or 3 word phrase, but then we need to, in English, it's perfectly acceptable to say on the weekend I play, but a German can't say that because the verb has to go second. Am Wochenende spiele ich. So you swap the ich and the spiele to make sure that the verb stays second. And again, that's just grammatical accuracy. So the verb might change from second place if there is a verb kicker, like weil or obwohl. So weil is going to send the verb to the end. Ich mag Pizza, weil es lecker ist. So ist, verb to be, going to the end. Ich spiele Tennis, obwohl ich nicht sportlich bin. Bin, again, the verb to be, going to the end. Ich rede nicht mit meiner Schwester, weil ich sie nicht leiden kann. So the verb can to the end. I don't talk to my sister because I can't stand her. And in this case, there are 2 verbs and they both go to the end, leiden and kann, and the modal verb is the one that goes to the very end. So when we're talking about word order and tenses, I mean, German is just a logical, very structured language. The verbs have to go in their rightful place. So if there are 2 verbs in a sentence, auxiliary verb, so for example, kann or darf or werde, they're auxiliary verbs because if you have them just on their own, it's not going to make sense. I can tennis or I will cinema doesn't make sense without a main verb. And then the main verb is always at the end in its infinitive form, which for the majority of verbs means they're going to end in en. Spielen, essen, gehen. So there's a few exceptions like sein, to be, which is irregular, or something like rodeln, tobogganing, ln. But in general, the main verb is going to end in en and is going to be at the back. So whether it's with modal verbs or future tense, all of these sentences, they're following the same structure. And the past tense, you've also got auxiliary verb second, the main verb is at the end as well. So verbs, they go second or they go last in German. That's the only place they can go. But with the past tense, the past participle is used, which is usually a GE, starting with GE. So ich bin ins Kino gegangen. Wir sind nach Wien geflogen. Ich habe meine Oma besucht. Wir haben Pizza gegessen. So the past participle, there are 3 occasions where it's not going to start with GE. That's if a verb starts with BE, like besuchen, to visit, which is besucht in the past. A verb starting with VER, like vergessen, to forget. Ich habe vergessen, so it actually stays the same, but VER is not going to add GE to the front, or verbs that are ending in ieren, like studieren. Ich habe studiert. They're not going to add a G to the front. Another thing to bear in mind with the past tense is that if we're moving, like going from A to B, going to the cinema, traveling to Vienna, then we need to use the verb to be. So literally, I am gone or we are flown. But if you're not going from A to B, so if it's not a verb of movement, sometimes it can be a bit tricky to get your head around because you think, oh, well, visiting is going from A to B, but the act of visiting is at my grand's house. So at my grand's house, that's not A to B, but you just have to, you can argue it all you like. My students love arguing with me, saying that's not movement, that's movement, but you just have to know that's a rough rule of thumb. It just is what it is, and you just have to remember there are certain verbs which they're movement verbs. What a German considers movement, they use the verb to be. All the rest, they use haben. And as we touched on before, if there are two verbs in a sentence and there's a verb kicker, both verbs go to the end. Ich bin musikalisch, weil ich Gitarre spielen kann. So main verb is at the end. So if you just said, I can play a guitar, ich kann Gitarre spielen. So the verbs are where we expect them to be. Spielen, the main verb, is at the end. But the verb kicker weil then says the modal verb to the very end. So you've got both verbs at the end and the modal verb is at the very end. Complex sentences, they're complex because they have two clauses, and that's often shown in German by a comma. And when you have a comma in German, we've often got the verb comma verb rule. So als ich junger war, verb, habe ich Tennis gespielt. And there's another video you can look at to see how we use things like wenn and als in sentences and the verb comma verb rule. So just click the link at the top. Structures in order to. So in English, we might not even say in order, we might just say to. So I go to Spain to visit my gran, or I go to Spain in order to visit my gran. And in German, we use the zu structure to show that. So in order, and then zu is to. So zu goes at the end, followed by the main verb, which always is going to end in en unless it's something like sein, to be, like gesund zu sein. So the last two words in that type of structure, I eat fruit in order to be healthy. Ich esse Obst, gesund zu, second to last, sein, infinitive verb, at the very end. So last step is to proofread. So check your word order. Are the verbs in the right place? Are they second or at the end? Are they in the correct form, ending in en? Has there been a verb kicker to send them to the end? Check your tenses. Have you translated the tense accurately? Have you written in the tense you've been asked to translate into? Present, past, future. Check your grammar, your verb endings. Have you used the correct prepositions? All these small little things that we've touched on in the video. Idiomatic phrases. Have you phrased it like a German would say it? And yeah, I think there's always something to be gained by proofreading. Always see it that people just finish their translation. Okay, done. Just make sure you haven't left any gaps. If there are gaps, fill it in with an educated guess, something in German. Otherwise, you're more likely to lose more marks than you might have otherwise, even if your guess is wrong. And there's always things you can pick up if you proofread it. Go over it with a fine-tooth comb. Just check everything really carefully. Can't emphasize that enough, that attention to detail is so important at the end. Just to pick up any little mistakes you might have made could make the difference of a mark or two, and that could be a grade boundary at the end of the day. So really important. But anyway, translation, it is tough, but just practice as much as you can. Any other tips, suggestions, questions? Let us know in the comments. Good luck for the translation. You've got this. Danke fürs Zuschauen. Auf Wiedersehen.